Hello, everyone. I'm Megan. For those of you who haven't seen me in a while, I've been hiding behind children and writing my dissertation because I'm still a student and will be a student forever and ever, it feels like. Anyway, I'm Megan. This is Josh. You're probably more familiar with him because he's done a lot more actual recording than I have recently. So, hi.
Yeah, but you're the brains behind the operation, so.
Yeah.
So this is our first time doing, what is it?
And Ask Me Anything.
Ask Me Anything. So here we go. Why don't you?
Okay.
We're really good at this.
We're very organized. So I want to say before we get going that Josh and I are both academics in the truest sense of the word. That means that we are not going to answer a question that we don't feel we have enough knowledge to answer. Like, we'll give you our personal opinion. But if there's something that you ask that is way, way, way beyond either of our field of interest, we'll probably say, I don't know that. Let me get back to you. And then we will go away and do research, because research is what we like to do, because we're very special people. We'll go away, do research, and then come back and give you a fuller answer. So apologies in advance if there's a lot of, I don't really know. Let me get back to you on that. I'll try not to do that too much. At least we can give you a very rough answer without like going into too many details. So
I have the live chat thing on this laptop right here. We already have a couple of questions that were. Beach has no questions. That's all right. Well, we can ramble on about things until you guys have, but we do have some questions that were pre-submitted, and I'm going to butcher his or her name. Let's see.
Oh, sorry. Before Josh goes into that, I also want to say that non-Mesopotamian questions are also totally cool. Like, if you want to ask, I don't know what my favorite color is. It's blue, by the way. Or what we do when we're not making videos and researching obscure branches of history, go for it.
Nothing is the answer. Moving on. So yeah, if I'm looking down here, that's what I'm doing. I'm trying to read the side chat. What's a thingy? So we should probably do a quick intro in case there are people watching that don't know what we do. First and foremost, we decided to do this because we passed 750 subscribers today.
I just knocked my elbow on it. Thank you.
We have kids.
It's awesome. We do. Yeah, it's awesome. It's really cool. And we've been doing this maybe 4 months.
Yeah, you guys are incredible.
And I genuinely didn't think that A, we'd last this long.
Yeah.
So that's awesome. And B, there'd be this much interest in what we do. So
yeah.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all very much.
Yeah, it's really cool.
So it's really exciting. For those of you that don't know or are just joining us for the first time, we are Digital Hammurabi. What we do is try to make the ancient Near East, which tends to be a little
weird,
esoteric, ivory tower-ish.
Mm-hmm.
We try to make that stuff accessible to everybody. So stuff that you wouldn't consider to be accessible, like I'm teaching Sumerian grammar to a number of students now. How many are we up to?
We have 6 or 7 on the mailing list.
Yeah.
Which is, it may not sound like a lot, but that's more than we normally have in class at grad school.
Yeah.
So it's not bad going.
Yeah. And I'll be turning that into a Sumerian grammar book, which will be great. And we're writing an introductory book to Mesopotamia. What's the title we're giving
Mesopotamia. Can you eat it?
There you go.
The answer is no.
So,
no, you can't. I mean, you could try, but you really shouldn't.
Yeah, you probably shouldn't. It's mostly dirt and clay.
Mostly dirt and clay, yeah.
Anyway.
And sheep.
And sheep, yes. There's 7 sheep.
7.
So that's what we do. So check out our videos. We do daily datas Monday through Friday, which can be a little taxing, but
I'm trying to persuade him that we only need to do 3 uploads during the week, because I'm not, like I said, I'm not making videos in the week because I'm working on my own stuff. He has a full-time job. He really doesn't need to be doing 5 videos a week. He doesn't believe me though. So
yeah, but see, the thing is, I read on the worldwide internet that you should put up a bunch of videos. So that's what I'm going to do.
We did that though.
I'm going to keep doing it. Sorry. Unless you tell me I can't, then I won't.
I've tried that. It's not working.
That's true. Okay, so that's what we're doing. Celebrating the 750 plus subscribers. You guys are amazing. And we will start with some of these questions. So see, I want to say Laodicean, but that's not what it is. It's
Lacedaemonian.
Lacedaemonian. Damn. Why don't you should do this?
No.
Okay.
I mean, I can, but
So the Lacedaemonian, 300. He says, to your knowledge, did regions of Mesopotamia suffer a substantial drought in the late 13th century BCE? Would this have led to famine and a possible mass exodus, specifically Assyria and Babylon? Go for it.
well, the 13th century is like way, way, way too late for me to actually speak intelligently on. My interest kind of stops once you hit the old Babylonian period, which is the mid-2nd millennium BC. So, your turn.
Okay, so 13th century is probably too early. I think what we're discussing here is the fall of, what happened relatively in the mid to late 12th century with the Sea Peoples. Sorry, there's another question. I'm going to leave that while I try to answer the question. So that period is extraordinarily complex. There's a book put out by Klein recently that, how recent was that? The 1177?
2015, I think.
Yeah. So, it's complicated. Here's what we know. There is a movement of mercenaries that started over in Western Turkey. They come across Turkey and come down. You have ships that go into the Mediterranean.
This is also related to the fall of the Mycenaean.
That's right.
The big Mycenaean cities that happens around this time as well.
That's right. So it's really important to Syro-Palestinian history because the Sea Peoples come down. There are a lot of destruction layers that happen right around 1200. And there is a battle that's recorded, a serious battle that's recorded with the Sea Peoples in Egypt, and they are rebuffed, and they... No, it's 853. This is earlier, but you're right. That is but they so that there's a particular group that gets stopped there at the border of Egypt, as far as I understand from the historical texts, and they settle along the coast there in Palestine, and those are the Peleset, which become the Philistines, right? And there's another Sea People group, another mercenary group that the Danites, which may be the origins of Israel, and so it's important from that perspective. But I think what he's referencing is this sort of fall that happens in the 12th century. It may have to do with interruption of trade routes. There's probably not one single cause for this. Probably power vacuums left. Probably, this is coming on the heels of the Amarna period. There's a Daily Data video about that Megan did, which is fantastic. But this is this period of international trade and international diplomacy, all the way from Egypt over into the Aegean region, over to Assyria, Babylonia. And I think that there's just this massive disruption, probably multifaceted, that leads to a collapse and a dark age that the Neo-Assyrian Empire will emerge from. So, good question.
About a drought specifically, I don't know.
Yeah.
We can look into that.
Somebody asked Shane if he's omnipresent, which I think is a great question.
I think the answer to that has to be yes.
Yeah. Shane is omnipresent. I'm sure there's something more to this. Sorry, skeptical Christian. So let me ask another question here. Beach says, someone said that Anana was Lilith. And the screen moved. Sorry. Where did it go? Ah, there it is. First time hearing that connection, and it made little sense to me. Well, you're the Anana Ishtar goddess.
I've never heard that before. It's possible there's a tablet out there somewhere that equates the two. I've not come across it, and I did my master's thesis on the goddess Anana Ishtar. It didn't come up. It's theoretically possible, but I've not heard that particular argument before.
One of the, I think, frustrating and wonderful, but frustrating things about the Sumerian pantheon and pantheons throughout history is that there's this assimilation that takes place.
There's a massive syncretization, especially with Inanna. So what happens in Mesopotamia is each city-state has its own individual pantheon. They normally map onto each other roughly, but each city-state has a god that is their patron deity. That god has their own family, and generally speaking, all of the patron deities of the individual cities are related to each other. So, like the god over here may be the brother of the god over here, and they're both sons of the sky god On. What happens is you get, as time goes by, as history develops, you get different people coming into contact with each other and saying, oh, hey, and this is a really simplistic explanation, but saying, oh, hey, your really awesome storm god is kind of like my really awesome storm god. They're probably the same person, we just use different names. So you get an understanding of all these different deities being the same 15. I've just plucked that number randomly from my head. Don't hold anything by it. But say they're all the same 15 gods, just with different names and slightly different aspects in different cities. So one of the things that happens with Inanna, that's her kind of Babylonian Sumerian name. She's called Ishtar by the Akkadians. There's this great hymn called the Syncretistic Hymn to Ishtar, which lists all of these other goddesses and all their various attributes, and then says basically these are Ishtar. This goddess who does this is Ishtar. I'll probably do a reading of that at some point just because it's cool. I've not heard the Lilith connection though, and that sounds rather biblical, so I don't know.
Good answer.
Thank you.
All right. Let's see. Oh, and we had a correction. He says it's pronounced Lacedaemonian.
Oh.
Spartan.
There we go. Thank you.
And he says he's still here, which is great.
Hooray.
Richard Wood says, hey, all, my beef with history, besides being written by the victor of the last war, is a focus on the Middle East. Well, tough. No, I'm just kidding. It's true. It's true. But see, when you're the earliest and the best, there's going to be a focus. Yeah. No, just kidding. No, that's a fair point, Richard. Let's see. I am biased, though. There's no question.
Oh, well, we both are.
Yeah, indeed.
I mean, I can talk a little bit about the classics, but not a lot.
All right. Clockwork Rex says, what are the earliest clay writing tablets they've found so far in cuneiform? You want to do it? You want me to?
Go for it.
So we have from the late Uruk period, which is the late 4th millennium, we have these administrative tablets. And that's the earliest writing that exists.
They're like one goat is the kind of level of detail we have here.
I mean, you know,
it's writing and it's cuneiform, but
yeah, but it's and you're exactly right. And that sort of economic. So there's a theory that was put out by Denis Schmatt-Besserat, still debated, but it's there's certain things that we know. And there's a video about this if you want to take a look at it on our channel. And
these tablets.
Yeah, sorry if I lose my train of thought. It's the MS. Anyway,
sheep, goats, administrative tablets.
What was I going to say about
Schmatt-Besserat?
Schmatt-Besserat, sure. So we know, like, for example, that tokens of some sort were used these little clay tokens were used as markers of commodities, right? It's sheep, grain, or whatever. And as time went by, in order to protect those tokens, let's say, for example, that I had Megan here, I'm the temple, or I own a bunch of sheep, and I want her to take those sheep somewhere else to sell them to somebody or to take them out in the fields and tend them or whatever. And I give her 5 sheep. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give her 5 tokens that represent those sheep. Because see, on the way over, let's say she's going to deliver them to Jim Bob over there on the other side of the country.
Good, strong Sumerian name.
Yeah, Jim Bob.
Yep.
Jim Bob Methuselah. And sorry. She could get over there and like, I got 5 sheep. I'm going to eat me one on the way over, right? And then I can just say, oh yeah, Josh only gave me 4 sheep. So here you go. This is cool. Well, if I give her 4 tokens, they represent each of the sheep. Well, then the problem is that she could drop one of the tokens too, right? So they would string them together on a string probably. But anyway, one of the ways that they then protected them is they put them in this clay ball, which was an envelope. And so it would be sealed. And so she couldn't break it open and get rid of them. And what they would do eventually is they would take those clay tokens, and while the clay on the ball was still wet, they would impress the tokens on the outside. So if there were 5 sheep and a triangle token represented the sheep, they would impress 5 times on the outside and then seal the tokens inside. Well, at some point they realized that they could just flatten that clay ball, impress the tokens, and then get rid of the tokens. They didn't need them anymore. And that was the transition to these cuneiform tablets. So, and of course that developed over time.
But the earliest we have, 4th millennium, administrative tablets.
All right, let's see. Do you know of any evidence outside of the Ugaritic tablets that implicates the Sea Peoples in the sacking and possible destruction of Babylonia and Assyria between 1207 and 1177? We covered that a little bit. What he's talking about there with the Ugaritic tablets is debated in and of itself. You know, we have tablets that are found in ovens, and originally the thought was that somebody was writing these tablets, seeing the Sea Peoples coming on ships afar off and going, oh no, the Sea Peoples are coming, let's bake these tablets. And then they got sacked and the tablets were still in the oven. That's not exactly how that worked, but nonetheless, what we do see is, destruction layers. One of the nice things about archaeological layers.
Did they make it all the way over to Babylon and Assyria?
No, I mean, I don't think so. The effects.
I didn't think so.
Yeah, the effects
I'm very
were
happy to be wrong. I know that there were like repercussions that went all the way down, but
we're not experts on the Sea Peoples.
No. I don't think they actually made it.
Yeah, we called them the Sea Peeps in school, but sorry.
He's down with the kids.
All right, let's see. Is this fun? I don't know. Is this audience?
I'm
how
having
we doing?
fun.
How are we doing? Is this okay?
Fun. That's all that matters.
Yeah, well, she's having fun. That's great. So I'll ask another question. You guys can tell us if you think this is good or not, if we need to do this differently. So do you actually think Israel emerges from Canaan, or there was some form of exodus out of Egypt, large or small? Let me do it. Yeah, so there was a...
I don't know these questions.
That's good. There's a book that was put out in I think 2015. I won't remember the name of it because I'm old and dumb.
Yes, that's the reason.
Yes.
Do you want me to look it up?
No, it's okay. We can find it, and I've mentioned it in other videos, but it's...
I'll put all the links to the books we mentioned in the description after we finished streaming. Wow. If anyone is interested.
I'm so glad you do that stuff. She does all the work, FYI.
Yeah, you just research and make the videos.
Yeah. So Beach says she's having fun. So J.R. Pone says he loves this. That's awesome. Noble Athenian. Yeah, I think maybe the means get off the air. I'm not sure. Hopefully it doesn't mean that. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah. I say dumb things. That's what I've learned.
Where did the Canaanites come from?
That's a good question. Right. So there's a book that was put out. A bunch of Egyptologists got together, I think in 2015, or maybe it was 13. It was published in 15 anyway. And they brought together all the recent scholarship. Jan Osman was there, Finkelstein was there, and some of these big names. And, the opinions range about the Exodus from, you have evangelical scholars that would argue for an actual Exodus, according to biblical accounts, somewhere between the 15th and the 13th centuries. Most would not argue for that. There's, an idea. We do have, and I'm not an Egyptologist, but we do have some evidence of encampments that are similar to Canaanite encampments, from a period roughly before 1200, I think. But the idea of a mass exodus, I think, is in the opinion of the majority of scholars would be no. This is some sort of memory of. It could be a memory of a small group of people coming out. So not settled, I guess, would be the answer there. But I think that given what we know about the Peleset and the fact that Israel is a latecomer to the scene, I don't think it's, and again, not having done specific research or written a dissertation on this, I don't think it's a stretch to think that Israel as a tribe comes from, part of this Sea Peoples movement or something akin to it. Okay. So did Babylon and Assyria have any direct contact and trade with Mycenae, or did they rely on Egypt and Canaan to be sort of a middleman for trading?
That's a very good question. I don't know for certain. I know that there are artifacts from Mesopotamia that are found in Mycenae, and kind of vice versa. There is, in the second millennium around the Amarna period, this international artistic style that Dr. Marion Feldman, one of my advisors, wrote on. You get kind of this this shared visual vocabulary that has a lot of Mycenaean elements that's found in Mesopotamia, in Nineveh, I think. Where are the ivories found? I think there's a bunch of ivories from Nineveh, but I'm not entirely sure, that have a really Mycenaean look to them. And this is kind of all over the Mediterranean. I don't, off the top of my head, know if there is actual evidence for like letters from Mesopotamian kings in Mycenae or the other way around. They do. Sorry, did the question include Egypt? Yeah, I don't know. I know there's contact between Mesopotamia and Egypt, direct contact, and then Egypt and Mycenae, or that kind of area. So I suspect that's how it occurred. Traders meeting in Egypt or Canaan, and then kind of traveling on further east. So I don't know for sure, is what I'm going with there.
Thank you. It's good. Sorry. Okay. So twice we've had same question. What's the current thinking on why or how base 60 developed?
Is it to do with counting on your hands?
Yeah, I mean, so this is my understanding. 1, 2, how's it go? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12.
Yeah. 13,
14, 15, 16, 17, 18. And so you get 5 12s, which ends up being 60.
I mean, that's my understanding as well. Again, I have very little knowledge of Mesopotamian mathematics, but that's how it was explained to me. And I guess it's just a different way of counting using your digits. So we do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And they use each knuckle, well, each finger joint, I guess, counts as one.
Mm-hmm.
So you get 3, 6, 9, 12. And that's the first 12 on this hand.
There's a lot of divisibility, right, in the base 60 system. It works out really well. So how that developed
beyond what I've just told you. And
Yeah.
I've told you more than I actually know. So
Hey, there you go.
I'm stealing your phrases.
Yeah, this is becoming a family
This is
thing.
what happens when you get
Yeah,
married.
that's right. Are we married?
Probably.
Yes.
There are some photos in our bedroom that suggest that maybe we are.
Sweet. Okay. Sorry. If you have time, can you talk about Urukagina of Lagash? Was his political vision a naive exercise in futility? Was he really the great visionary that he's made out to be? Thanks, guys.
Great question. So Urukagina of Lagash is a king from 3rd millennium. I hope to God I'm getting my dates right, because if I'm not, and anyone that has taught me in the past sees this, I'm going to be hauled in and spoken to sternly. So he was a king, like I've said, from Lagash. And what is being referred to in the question is a group of texts called the Reform Texts of Urukagina, in which he enumerates all of the different social injustices he put right. So people were abusing their positions of authority, and he stopped them from doing that, and he clothed the poor and fed the orphans, and generally was an all-round nice guy and made everything better. Whether this actually happened is anybody's guess, because for this period of time, all of the textual evidence we have comes from the kings. And it goes back to this problem with the victors write history. In Mesopotamia, and I suspect in a lot of ancient societies, the people who write history when writing is first a major thing, the people who write history are the people who are rich and in power and have access to this really cool elite technology. So we have the Reform texts, and we have several different recensions of them. But there's very, very little way, well, there's no way really to know whether he actually carried out the reforms he said he carried out, if he was just a horrific, violent despot who was trying to cover his back for posterity. We don't know. I suspect this kind of thing is not massively common for the time period it's from. I suspect he may have been something of a reformist. And these texts were written, they weren't aimed at the population, so it's not like he was spreading propaganda to his own people to try and quell social unrest or create a better image for himself. The general populace probably wouldn't have been able to read this stuff. Off the top of my head, I don't know where they were found. They may have been set up publicly. More likely they're from a temple context. So the general thinking would be that these were written for the gods, to show the gods what wonderful people the kings were and how they're kind of carrying out divine will on earth. So I suspect that there's probably some truth to what was written, but there is absolutely no way to know for certain.
And this is a common thing among the kings in Mesopotamia. It's sort of part of divine kingship. So I just recorded the daily data for tomorrow, and we talk about, did Oliver flip over? Yeah. So, damn it. Oh, I really hate MS. Hammurabi, yes. So Hammurabi does this. Thank you. She's amazing. So kings, they're not these despots that we would expect. They're not dictators. They're there to care for the people. They're there to, and of course, this is, we have to take that. I don't know what I'm trying to say. Anyway, so
it's part of Mesopotamian kingship is looking after the people, or at least putting a good show on looking after the people.
Yeah.
That's not to say that they weren't violent, horrific acts that were carried out in the name of the king. Especially the Assyrian rulers in the 1st millennium BC have a great habit of inscribing giant slabs of stone that were placed on the wall, inscribing those with images of beheadings and warfare. And there's a delightful scene known as the garden scene, which shows an Assyrian king and possibly his wife reclining in a garden scene with grapes and vines, and there's a severed head like hanging from a tree over there. And I'm like, wow, that's nice. But so they did this to try and deter other people from attacking them, or deter vassal states from rebelling against them. But towards their own people, Mesopotamian kings, and bear in mind, when I say Mesopotamian kings, I'm talking about like 4,000 years of history. So there is obviously variation in there. But generally speaking, Mesopotamian kings were supposed to look after their people. And by and large, that's what they did.
Mm-hmm.
That's not to say they did not quell rebellion viciously. But generally speaking, it seems like they tried to maintain just rulership.
If you have not met Oliver, this is Oliver. He's in his 30s, but he's not in his 30s. Just, I need to I'm not funny.
I think you're funny.
Oh, okay.
He thinks you're funny.
No, he doesn't.
Yes, he does. He smells.
He hears me mumbling. That's what it is.
He thinks you're funny.
Okay. So Noble Athenian says, how did it come about that each city had its own deity in the first place? Good question. I don't know that we have what I could consider to be a definitive answer on this. Some of the arguments, one that I find more compelling perhaps, is, deities started off early on, particularly in the 4th millennium, as phenomena, right? Natural phenomena. So you have a god of the sun. The sun itself is a deity. The moon is a deity. The storm cloud is a deity. So this type of polytheism is, it's very common. In the 3rd millennium, you sort of have this juxtaposition of both the natural phenomenon as a deity and an anthropomorphic figure as the deity. So Utu is the sun, but he's the sun god, and you have you can have both the symbol of the deity and the anthropomorphic representation of the deity coexisting, right? So when you have this sort of polytheistic view, I think it's only natural to not want to get rid of any particular deity because they're part of this culture. But you have different cities have different strengths. The area of Mesopotamia, particularly in the south, is it's very diverse, relatively speaking. So in an area that is big on fishing, you would have the fish deity, right? A grain goddess might be in a city that is focused more on cultivating grain. And so I think, while it's, extraordinarily difficult, if not impossible, to determine with any kind of certainty how this happened, I think that sort of a scenario would create a good environment in order for that sort of individual god with an individual city scenario to take place.
There's also something to the political organization of the early Mesopotamian period, because everything it didn't exist as this homogeneous entity.
That's right.
So people just had their own way of life.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, the when Sargon in the 25th century tied together his empire, conquered this large region. Prior to that, you have this Hexapolis. These cities are sort of grouping together, but not as a cohesive unit. They're sort of allies, maybe underneath, perhaps, the king of Kish, the city of Kish. But, this type of hegemony that, comes under somebody like Hammurabi, it's later, right? And so not only do you have variety in the pantheon, the various deities of the pantheon, but you have individual city-states that are distanced from the other city-states, and so they have kind of their own thing going on down there. And of course, how they viewed the pantheon directly correlated to how they viewed the organization of their cities as time progressed. So, yeah, I think that's as close as maybe I can get to answering that question. Have you guys heard of the idea that the 10 plagues of the Exodus were really a mockery of the gods of Egypt? I read this theory a few years ago, and it seemed to make sense. I asked this question of Dr. Bryson, actually.
Oh, did you?
Or was it Catherine? I can't remember. Anyway, an Egyptologist. And I remember her answer being dubious. Like, I don't know, is the answer. There's no question that these biblical texts are written as, at least in part, as polemics, against these other religious traditions. So when you read through Genesis 1 through 11, or particularly 6 through 9 with the flood, or the creation accounts in 1 and 2, I think looking at these as counter stories to the Mesopotamian stories is, a perfectly reasonable approach to looking at those texts. So I would not be surprised, I guess, if I found out that there were certain Egyptian deities that were being directly countered by the individual plagues. But I do remember asking that question of an Egyptologist and having her go, yeah, that's ridiculous. So I will note that and see if I can't come up with a better answer than that. Keep the questions coming, guys. This is great. I'm looking back through the list to see if I missed any. Okay. Did the ancient Assyrian warriors get mental illnesses from all the beheadings and skin removal?
That is a great question. I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised. And actually, I'm trying to organize an interview with a professor in, I think she's at Cambridge, who works on mental illnesses as represented in the medical texts of Mesopotamia. So I will table that question and give that to her when we manage to arrange an interview. I don't know. It wouldn't surprise me. We also do have to ask the question of whether these horrific things actually happened. So like I said, the Assyrians are famous for depicting horrific events on their palace walls as a deterrent against as a deterrent against warfare from other states. Whether this happened can be argued about. If it happened regularly is another question entirely. Some of the palace reliefs do depict specific events that we know about, actual wars like the Siege of Lachish. But I think if I had to flay people alive, I'd probably get some kind of PTSD from it. So I wouldn't be surprised at all, but I don't know what evidence we have for it.
Let's see. Beach, it would be exciting if any of the Göbekli Tepe religious thoughts, whatever they were, got carried forward to Sumer and on. Göbekli Tepe, don't we bring in somebody on?
Yep, on the 25th of September, we have one of the archaeologists from Göbekli Tepe coming to talk to me.
We're tired of all the nonsense.
Yes, basically.
This is the other thing that we want to do, right? We want to be sort of this liaison, the channel for finding these knowledgeable scholars on these topics and funneling them through to you through interview. And this is the other point that for our Patreons, if you're watching or if you are a Patreon, one of
thank you.
Hi buddy. I think one of the primary goals of setting up this summer research grant that we are a couple $100 into, maybe. So we're doing pretty well. For those of you that don't know, we have set up our Patreon account. Any money that gets donated to the Patreon goes directly to funding a PhD student, or maybe a postdoc, but probably a PhD student, to go on a summer research trip and
then come back and tell us all about what they did.
So the process will be that we'll have an application process, much like any other scholarship, like the Fulbright or the Day, and people will submit a short paper or maybe an outline, a detailed outline of what they want their research project to look like and what they're hoping to achieve. And we will narrow it down to maybe 10 different candidates from the ancient world. That's what we're trying to focus on, papers about the ancient world, research projects from there. And then we will have them come on. We will interview them here on the channel. And then the Patreons will vote on who they would like to fund. And then that person will go. And we want to send them off with $2,500 if we can, because that's if you're going to go to Germany and read the tablets in Berlin, it costs money to get over there, to stay, and it takes some time to do that. So we want to fund it well. But then they'll come back and they will give a presentation telling everybody about what they discovered. So this is one of the ways that you get to be directly involved with how research gets done, really. So I don't know why I started talking about that.
We started with Göbekli Tepe.
Ah, yes. So Göbekli Tepe.
It will be interesting to hear about Göbekli Tepe because I know very little about it. I do know it wasn't built by aliens.
Is it? Yeah, and it's not tough.
Yep, Jens Notroff. He will be coming to chat with us. So I know very little about Göbekli Tepe, and it will be interesting to hear what he says and about the theories for the religious beliefs. So Oliver is also interested.
All right. Shane has a quote from Plato, and I like Shane's quote, so I'm going to read it. It's not really a question, but we shall employ these subdivisions and give to each portion the name of a god or of a child of gods, and bestow on it altars and all that belongs. Plato Laws, Book 6. Thank you, Shane. Plato's dope. Richard Wood, there are no gods, but where else would the idea spring from that the real world But where else would the idea spring from than the real world that surrounds the tribe? Yeah, and I mean, I think you're spot on there.
It makes sense. You try and explain the world around you.
And this is where I think that we can go awry. As 21st century Westerners looking back at a document like Genesis and say, well, this must be a historical scientific presentation of the creation of the world. In reality, this is it's an etiological mythological text. If you haven't been following me and Skylar on the Skylar Fiction Show, we've been reading through the Bible in sections. We've done Genesis 1 to 9 in 2 episodes. So go to his channel, like and subscribe. Skylar, I think, will be happy that I said that. His channel's amazing, great guy. And he's always so kind to us.
Yes.
But it's, if there's one thing that's clear as you read through these texts, is that they're looking at the world around them, and they're trying to make sense not only of what they see, but what they believe and how they think, right, and how it came to be. So, yeah. Okay, Christopher Schroeder. Previous popular archaeology tended to portray Assyria as this unpleasant place, a dark time for the people. Is this just because of the art or because they hate you?
I suspect the art in the biblical account probably have a lot to do with it.
Yeah. I mean,
Assyria isn't nice in the Bible.
no, definitely
It's a
not.
horrible, horrible place. And even a lot of early Assyriologists were biblicists, kind of looking to find the places mentioned in the Bible. And if the Bible is all you have to go on, then that's the picture of the culture and the history. Do you mind? That's the picture of the culture and the history that you're going to get. And then if you uncover these horrific wall reliefs with beheadings and flayings, and of course it's going to be naturally a horrible place.
Yeah. But you know, they were normal people. You know, we have their administrative text, we have their economic text, and we have letters from the old Assyrian period. There's a video on that. I should stop mentioning videos because there's like 1,000 links at the bottom. But you know, we have their letters, we have their omen series, you know, the things that they feared, the things that they dreamed about, you know, dream compendia. I mean, you know, they're normal people, like, you know, like we were, and trying to, it's all a journey. Okay. So Suryoyo, which is an amazing name, did any of the Mesopotamians get in contact with Central Asia or East Asia?
I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, you know, the most that I see is contact with Melucha and
The Indus Valley.
Yeah, the Indus Valley
and
Marhashi.
Anatolia.
Right. So Iran and Indus Valley, you have them going south down to Magan, so along the Oman region. And but I don't know of anything.
Got much further than that.
Yeah. I don't know of anything in the documentation. Good question, though.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Skylar Fiction says, why does Skylar Fiction have the best channel ever? That's my question. It's a good question. I think it's...
Because it features Josh so much.
I was going to say because of the ruggedly handsome guy that runs it. It probably has a lot to do with it.
And because of the amazing artwork in the background.
And because
features his hat, which is just the best picture I think I've ever seen.
And he gives really great advice on, you know, marital relations. If you don't know what I'm talking about, go watch the last 2 videos that we did. Okay. Yeah, Skylar's amazing. Megan, the theory is that Göbekli Tepe was built by Atlanteans. LOL.
Oh, well, that makes more sense than aliens.
Well, I built it, maybe. So. Oh, Epic Christ is in the room. Hello, Epic Christ. Okay. So Noble Athenian, I value Genesis and Exodus as expressions of mythology. That's exactly right. Yep. I think you're spot on. Let's see. Oh, the screen skips. Let's see. Why did Assyrians and Babylonians, or what did Assyrians and Babylonians think about the Jews?
Did the Jews exist?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. So what we do know is we have evidence, first millennium evidence. Okay, so let's say it this way. During the Neo-Assyrian period, what the Assyrian kings did is they marched, right? They expanded to the west. That's what they did. They went on these campaigns. Every year they went on a campaign to the west. Boom. You know, they're going over there. They're trying to expand. And so they come into contact. I mean, you see it in the biblical account, right? So the book of Isaiah, you can see all these interactions with the Assyrians, and they're forced to pay tribute. And what you end up seeing with a king like Tiglath-Pileser III in 745, for example, is that the kings leading up to him are kind of weak. And so the Neo-Assyrian period has kind of gone into decline. And when that happens, I gave the example of an office where your boss comes to the office all the time, and you have, let's say you have 5 office workers, and the main boss that runs the company has his office there, and he's coming to the office every day. Well, when he's there, man, all those office workers, they're really on their best behavior. They're very productive. But if he starts working from home, slowly but surely, you're going to find that while the cat is away, the mice will play, right? So lunches start to get a little bit longer, and they start coming in a little late and leaving a little early. You start to have inter-office politics, start to take place where people get into, fights with each other or start to get kind of territorial. And it all gets quashed the moment the boss comes back in. Well, that's exactly what happens with a place like Assyria and the Syro-Palestine, because you have, for example, the northern kingdom of Samaria. You've got a king that the eastern overlord Assyria starts to get kind of weak, and he's forced to deal with things internal to Assyria, and so he's not campaigning all the time. Well, now that king, he's not paying as much tribute, or things aren't quite as bad for him, and so he gets this great freedom. There's prosperity, everything's going great. Well, then Tiglath-Pileser III comes to the plate, and boom, he's strong king. He's back campaigning again, and now everything's going to pot over for the kings in Israel. So this is the interplay that happens between the East and the West. And of course, when in the takeover, 612, 610, 609, you have this changeover into the Neo-Babylonian Empire with Nebuchadnezzar. The same sort of thing happens, but with Judea instead. So, good question. Sorry. Epichrist, another question. Who are these Semitic people in the Egyptian slave list? Brooklyn Papyrus. Yeah. I mean, again, I wouldn't want to comment too terribly much on Egyptian texts, given that I'm not an Egyptologist. I think it'd be a good idea to bring Dr. Bryson on. But one of the things that you have to do is you have to look at what it is that the majority of scholars in the field say about that. That doesn't mean that that's the final answer. Sorry, I'm talking a lot here. But, as a Syriologist, we try really hard to stay away from Egyptological things, particularly when it's something that's debated like this.
Because we just don't have the training to fully understand the complexity of the issue.
Yeah.
I don't know the evidence. I don't know the arguments. I don't know what people who have spent their lives researching this have to say on it. So I just don't know.
And the thing is, and this is the material point, because I suspect that some of you that may be hearing that and saying, aha, gotcha. We have probably 10 times the training in Egyptology than any normal person.
Any person with a life.
Yeah, I mean, we had to take an awful lot of Egyptological courses. That being said, if we don't feel comfortable commenting on something debatable like that, it would behoove the person asking the question to think to themselves, well, gosh, I don't really have much of any training formally in this. Maybe I should defer to the Egyptologist as well. Just a thought. But that's a good question. There's no question that that's a good question. That was a weird sentence. All right, Skylar's got to run. Good to see you, man. I'll tune in tonight for the debate with the guy that I can't remember his name, Standing for Truth, I think. I think it should be interesting. Christopher Schroeder, kind of silly, not serious questions, the best kind. Which part of Babylonian and Assyrian history would be most interesting to set a role-playing game in?
Oh, that's a great question. Amana period.
Oh, yeah.
Or the Old Babylonian period.
The Old Babylonian.
The Amana period, because you've got this wonderful influx of cultures and peoples all in one place. You've got all of this contact going on. You've got like the king of Assyria sending letters to the king of Egypt saying, I was sick last week. Why didn't you send me flowers? Or why didn't you come to my housewarming party? Basically, which is just amazing. So there's all of that stuff going on. But the Old Babylonian period is fantastic because we have this really interesting kind of power struggle going on between 4 or 5 different kings. And it's absolutely fascinating.
I mean, you've got, sorry, we're talking about the Old Babylonian period. You've got Hammurabi borrowing troops from Zimri-Lim. And
Zimri-Lim writing and saying, I need those guys back now. And Hammurabi saying, I'm not done with them yet.
Yeah, I'll totally get them back to you real soon. So interesting comment from Epic Christ. Let's see, where'd it go? He says, check out the Nebuchadnezzar Chronicle and Cyrus Chronicle. It matches the Bible. I think that's directed at us.
Probably.
And this brings up a point that I think we all need to think about as historians. There's nobody that does history in the ancient Near East, nobody that I know of that's reputable, would ever consider making an argument that the biblical texts don't contain historically accurate sections, right? I mean, that would be ridiculous. They're written in a period, and we have, I think, good copies of texts that reflect things that were going on in the first millennium. There's just no question. I mean, we have Omri mentioned in monumental architecture. I mean, in a monument. You have the Chaldean inscription. I mean, there's no question that there's historicity in some of these texts, right? That doesn't mean that the supernatural things that are described as causing these things to happen.
It's like looking at a steampunk novel set in Victorian England and saying, oh, look, this novel has Queen Victoria in. We know Queen Victoria was a real person. Therefore, werewolves were probably also running Parliament.
Harry Potter. I'm sure there's a lot of stuff about England. Have you ever been to England?
No.
Oh, well, I'm sure there's a lot of stuff in Harry Potter that you could match up, right? All right. Can you?
She's done a really good job of keeping current affairs out of it.
Oh, well, that failed. Anyway, but your example was great, so I defer to that. Anyway, but that's important to remember. Just because New York City exists doesn't mean Spider-Man exists. And a lot of detail.
Spider-Man doesn't exist.
Or maybe he does. Okay, so good thing to point out there.
We should do a video on the things about Mesopotamia the Bible got right.
Yeah, I think that would be good.
Because there is a lot.
Noble Athenian, it's amazing how little extra biblical evidence there is for the Hebrews before the 10th century. Preach it. You are exactly right. The Amarna period is my favorite. J.R. Prone, yes, it is amazing. It's one of the things, though, that if you get a degree in Assyriology, that you will get tired of hearing about very quickly, because there's so much interplay that, okay, so we have to take, at Hopkins, you have to take a 3-year history cycle, which is amazing, but you have an entire year of history.
Syro-Palestinian, Mesopotamian, and Egyptological, which is great and fascinating, but you get the Amarna period in all 3 of them.
Yeah, and it's like, it's all the same writing, it's all the same information, and so we end up knowing it reasonably well.
It's a really cool period, though.
Yeah, it really is, no question. Okay. Right, so here I think that they found Babylonian arrows in Israel when they did excavation in the city of David. I mean, yeah, I don't know about that, but
why not?
Yeah, there's no surprise there.
We know that there were Mesopotamian people in the area. That's really not no question.
I think things that you'd want to consider, though, more are the excavations of Jericho, and why they, and Kathleen Kenyon dug that, they didn't match up, and somebody like, oh boy, Bryant Woods has to come back do a dissertation that is then later, I think, debunked fairly soundly. Noble Athenian, many myths and legends have roots in history, or that history inspires myth. Yep. Okay, J.R. Pone, Dr. Josh, I know you're not an Egyptologist, but what is your opinion on the Merneptah stela mentioning Israel? I've seen apologists use it and others claim it's fake. I mean, the one thing that we know about the Merneptah stela is that it mentions Israel as a very small piece of the puzzle, right? So it's just a small tribe that exists, I think, in the Shephelah. I don't know that, but I mean, it's a, what I do know, it's not this major group that's there that's taken over. So actually, I think the Merneptah stela supports the idea of Israel coming late to the game and trying to rewrite their history, which is not a bad thing. That's the thing. Look, if you're a Christian, there's nothing wrong. There's nothing in the world wrong with embracing the mythology of of Genesis, for example, right, or of Exodus, of the patriarchal period. There's just nothing wrong with embracing that mythology because this is what people did. It doesn't in any way negate.
Do it.
Yeah,
you still have countries who have like a national mythology and how they came to be. Yeah, sure, it might be based on some historical record, but a lot of it is also based on how people feel, how they wish to portray themselves. I mean, it's just what people do. You make stories about who you are and where you've come from. They might not be true. They might not be entirely true, but that doesn't make them any less interesting or any less relevant to who you are as a person.
That's right. So, if you hold to the existence of the God of the Bible and the validity of that religious tradition, that doesn't mean that just because the texts aren't meant as scientific or scientific texts or historiography as we would view them, historiography today, that somehow proves that the God of the Bible doesn't exist. That's not the idea. And so I think holding tenaciously to something like young earth creationism, because we have this chronology that goes back in Genesis 5 and Genesis 10, I just think it's not necessary. It's not necessary to do that. Anyway, okay. Sorry. Epic Christ. Okay. What do you think about mythicism? Can you take them serious?
You mean myths?
Because sometimes they lie about characters like Zeitgeist. Mythicism, are you talking about New Testament mythicism specifically? If we're just talking about mythology in general, I mean, I don't know how else.
Calling them lies is completely missing the point of what they do, though. Mythology is not true or false. Yeah.
Yeah, what is the question about, I know it's my go-to, but David saying, day and night my tears have been my food. Is that true or false?
It's neither. It's a metaphor.
Yeah, that's a weird question to ask of a poetic statement. Now, if you're asking what he means by day and night my tears have been my food, which is that he's extraordinarily sad, and because of that he's neglected to do the normal things like eat, is the fact that he was really sad and didn't eat, is that true? Then you can ask that, because that's a historical question, right? But asking if day and night my tears have been my food, if that's true, that's not a good question. It says that we don't understand. If you ask that, it means you don't understand the genre of poetry. But of course we do. We have poetry today. So then when you come to a genre that we don't have today, like Genesis 1, cosmological genre, and you ask, well, is this true? It's the same sort of weird question that you're asking of a poem. Is that true? Well, that's weird. You don't ask that of a cosmological text. You ask, what is Genesis 1 trying to do? And what Genesis 1 is trying to do is say, not Marduk, not Asher, not Baal, Yahweh.
Yahweh is the best God. He is the only God, but he's the guy who made the world. All you other people have your own weird gods and bizarre cosmology, and you're all wrong and we are right. So
good question. Yeah, Wild Heart 666. I don't think many atheists say nothing in the Bible is historical. To be fair, I would agree. I don't know any that would say that. What did the Bible get right? Sounds brilliant. Do it. I think it's a good idea. My wife always comes up with good ideas.
The thing is, you're the one who has to execute them.
All right, Beej. Thank you for coming over. I really appreciate it. Yeah, she's got to go. Makes sense. Life goes on. Life exists outside of our YouTube channel. It's weird to imagine.
No.
Okay. So, and what happened to Sumer and the Sumerians? That's a complicated question. It's a good one. The idea that there was this discrete group called the Sumerians in and of itself is debated, right? So if such a discrete group ever existed, they would have become part of Mesopotamian culture, right? And so the idea that there would have been this group of people that would have been, what's the word that I'm thinking of? Not ethnically, but
culturally?
No. Because see, the Mesopotamian culture became this sort of all-pervasive thing. You had some practices in the north, you had practices in the south, but to keep this, homogenous group called the Sumerians together and that they somehow disappeared is just a misnomer.
Yeah,
that's not how it works.
There's no evidence for that. It's not accurate.
What we do, although I totally understand why it seems that way, because Sumerian died as a language probably in the late third millennium. I think definitely when you come in,
died as a spoken language.
That's right. Well, I mean, it died for all intents and purposes, like Latin died, right?
Yeah.
What's interesting about Sumerian is that coming into the second millennium, it became sort of the religious scribal language, right? All the elite scribes that studied at the city of Nippur, for example, they were well trained. That was their sort of their calling card, was that they were well trained in Sumerian, and Sumerian became the language that transmitted so much of the mythology, and that was used in so many of the incantations and omens, and it's stuck. And so as you come down, that frozen language became really the vessel by which so many of these traditions passed down to form the standardized canonical text that we get in the first millennium. And that's what gave it its longevity, I think. So Sumerian was a very important language, a very important written language, even when Akkadian and later Aramaic took over, and even even later, I think our last Sumerian text is it Sumerian or is it just cuneiform text? I think our last.
I don't know.
Anyway, 75 CE. So it's it had great longevity. Good question, though.
There was this kind of split that you will have heard us talking about between North and South, which may be where people get the idea of like the Sumerians from, because you have this group in the south, southern Mesopotamia, that are invaded and taken over by the Akkadians and then the Assyrians. Of course, then the Babylonians repay the favor and invade the north as well. But there's not so much of this like Semitic invaders destroying the pure Sumerian culture that seems to be in some of the older literature. Southern Mesopotamian culture persists, is amalgamated, is influenced by the north, influences the north. It's not this this thing that just dies out because of invasion.
That's right. It's good.
Thank you.
Keep them coming, guys. This is great. Epic Christ. Well, in Kings, it says that Exodus happened in 1400, which matches the Asiatic people and Avaris.
We've already talked about Exodus, Epic Christ. I have argued with you over Twitter several times. I really have no desire to get into a long debate about the Bible right now. If you want to come and talk to Josh about the Bible, email us. You two can have your own private argument.
No, hey, I gotcha. I mean, I think, Epic, the thing to remember here is that in these things that I think that you would agree, even though you take a very different position on something like the Exodus, I think even you would agree that this is not something that's agreed upon, and that the majority of people that work in this field, Egyptologists, would argue that the idea of 2.5 million people in 1440, in the 15th century, having a mass exodus out of Egypt under Moses is not the reality. That's not actually what happened, right? So if that's the case, that this thing is debated, what I would suggest is that you sort of approach that like we approach it. And that is to say, what do the scholars say? And if I'm really interested, I mean, like if you're really interested, you want to know about the Exodus, start studying. Go to school, right? Go get your bachelor's. If you don't have it, go get your master's. Or if you're good enough, you can go right out of your bachelor's into a PhD program. Find a good school that does Egyptology. Hopkins is one that does amazing Egyptology. Betsy Bryan, Richard Jasnow, I mean, these are exceptional Egyptologists. But, if you talk, for example, to Egyptologists that do this every day in the field, they will tell you that people like Kenneth Kitchen, and there's another one that I can't remember at the moment, that these guys are good scholars until they get to something like the Exodus, because it's intertwined with their faith. And when you do that, you tend to have some cognitive dissonance. So that's what I would suggest. Sorry, I will stop commenting on the Exodus. I mean, I do think the Exodus is interesting, and obviously Epic Christ does too. But you're right. We should spread the.
I think you guys should just do a show somewhere.
Yeah, the thing is, I don't have. I know. My dissertation is on unorthographic MSL laments, right? So, but we should get Dr. Bryson on here. We should. Dr. Bryson. Yeah, Maggie can help. Okay. Sorry, I feel like I'm not doing very well at getting these questions. Oh, sorry, everybody. Look at the Amarna Pyramid. Okay, Schroeder. Okay, looking at the Amarna period map, I'm embarrassed to say I've never heard of the Elamites. Is that what we're saying? And I had collegiate archaeology. What is the thumbnail description of the Elamites? Elam, if that's what we're talking about. Sorry. Here's his thing. The Elamites, they exist in modern day Iran. So the Zagros Mountains region, Elamites.
Big, powerful kingdom.
Yeah, and one of the things that you see with Elam is that they always have a tremendous influence on Mesopotamia, but they very rarely try to stay and take over in Mesopotamia. The one time that I can think of that they try to do that is actually during this period, the Old Babylonian period, with Hammurabi. And so it's difficult. Look, Mesopotamia is difficult to rule. It just is. There aren't any real good borders that you can defend, natural boundaries. And so it's difficult when you're far away, particularly through a mountain range like the Zagros Mountains, to maintain control in the heartland. And so, however, Elam decides that it's going to come across, help defeat this particular group. And then in the north of Mesopotamia, it sort of sets up shop. And they end up getting their asses handed to them, frankly.
Oh, sorry, that's my dad.
Skype. See, Beach isn't the only one getting a Skype call. Yeah, so I think it's important to know who the Elamites are. They're over in the east, major power, but their influence tends to be sort of like interjecting into Mesopotamia, but they tend to not be able to have any lasting effect as far as coming in and conquering or whatever. So good question. Okay. Sorry. All right, Wildheart 666. Thanks for coming in, man. Woman, sorry, I can't tell. Individual. It was really great having you. So, what are some of the earliest artworks found in Mesopotamia? Boy, this is a question for Megan. So, okay, earliest artwork in Mesopotamia.
Oh no.
So we have Stelia the Vultures is really early.
We a lot. It depends what. Oh my goodness, sorry.
You may hold on.
No, it's Dad. I've told him I'll call him back. I don't think he's got the message.
Oh,
so it depends kind of what you mean by artwork. I guess the oldest, most famous thing is the Uruk vase, which is a very tall limestone or alabaster vase that has scenes carved on it. So it's divided into, I think, 5 registers. The bottom register is water, then there's grass, then I think sheep and goats, I can't remember which way around they go. Then you've got a line of naked men carrying things, and then at the very top you have this line of men with offerings standing behind a figure that is either a king or a priest, who is himself in front of either a priestess or a goddess, and then behind her is a bunch of produce and vessels and stuff. Exactly what this shows has been debated. We're not sure if the woman is a priestess or a goddess. It's hypothesized that it is people, where the bottom registers show like the fecundity of the land and agricultural life, and then and then the top registers are people bringing offerings to the temple, either for the goddess or the priestess. Not entirely sure what's going on there, but it's very interesting and very beautiful, and was probably part of a pair originally, and it's currently housed in the Iraq Museum in Baghdad. It was looted during the I want to say uprising. I don't think uprising is the right term, but it was looted and then thankfully returned, sadly in pieces, but it has been restored and is now back on display. I have a video about it, I think, with pictures and stuff. So it's pretty cool. I like it. Do we have?
Yeah. Sorry. So.
And sorry, that's the oldest famous thing. We have, from much earlier periods, decorated vessels, and I mean, even the stuff from the royal tombs of Ur is probably considered artwork. Beautiful headdresses, and cylinder seals, and jewelry. There's a lot of really, really beautiful stuff.
It'd be a cool video, Daily Data, to do.
Which?
Just a general overview of art.
That would be a series.
Oh.
Yep.
It'd be a series.
There's a lot of stuff.
I would not do that one.
I will do that one when I finish my dissertation.
Oh, it's going to take not too long.
A couple of years.
I don't know why it is that you're going so slow. Oh. Just kidding.
He takes time.
He does. Okay. Right. Deborah McMillan. For Sumerians, was the cross the symbol of an earth god or king? I don't know of the cross.
Off the top of my head, I don't know that there's a cross in Mesopotamian symbology.
Yeah, do you...
Symbolism? I don't know.
Do you...
Is there a specific thing you have in mind?
Epic says Tammuz, but the cross was a T in my understanding. Can somebody...
Dumuzi?
Yeah, I mean, Tammuz is a very late rendering of the name of Dumuzi.
He was a shepherd.
Yeah, I don't know what cross you're referring to. Let's see. What else? But yeah, I'm sorry, Deborah, I don't mean to... If you know, let me know which one. Does the history that's been uncovered from Mesopotamia involve a transition from Stone Age to Bronze, or does it only cover the Bronze Age? Mesopotamian history, the majority of it deals with the early Bronze Age and down into the Iron Age. So again, writing develops late 4th millennium, and during the 3rd millennium is when history really starts to, as far as the texts are concerned, to sorry, I can't do two things at once clearly.
I'll take the chat next time.
Yeah, no, you're right. Yeah, Megan definitely needs to do the chat next time. Right, so you have the early dynastic period in the 3rd millennium, and of course this is early Bronze, and yeah, so I would say most of the meat historically happens during the early and middle Bronze. Well, I get all of the Bronze Age, and of course into the Iron Age. So,
and I should say that what is counted as Mesopotamian history generally begins with the advent of writing. What is before that is normally termed prehistory, and we are taught about it. It's been a while for both of us. And again, once the dissertation is finished and I have time to actually go back and research these things, I'm going to be doing an in-depth look at Mesopotamian history, starting with the prehistorical stuff, because it's quite foundational for a lot of what comes after it.
The PHS.
Exactly.
The prehistorical stuff.
So we will get there eventually. It's just going to take a little while.
That's what the cool kids call it.
Exactly.
They don't.
And we are nothing if not cool.
That's true. That's true. Okay. So assuming that the writing we have talks about the ruling class and the people who did the writing, how much do we know about the lower classes? How well is it documented? Good question.
So for most periods of Mesopotamian history, you are quite correct. The majority of the written material comes from the elites. However, in the Old Assyrian period, we have a cache of, or several caches of letters from a trading post in we have a cache of letters from a trading post in Anatolia, which is in Turkey. Sorry, one second.
Come in, it's okay. Oh. Well,
so we do have letters written by merchants who wouldn't have been poor, but definitely would not have been an elite in the same way that like the kings and the royal families would have been. So we know a lot about those people and how they lived. We have letters from wives to husbands saying, "Why haven't you come home yet? You need to send me more money. We're low on food. I can't buy oil." If we're talking about those who farmed the land, those who made up the bulk of the armies, the people who did the hard labor, very little written evidence from them. And unfortunately, because of how Mesopotamia has been excavated in the past, we don't have an awful lot in the way of material culture either. The way archaeology has worked in Mesopotamia, people kind of go out into the plain and all of the cities, all of the towns make these mounds. They're called tells. And it's just from the buildup of human occupation. So people say, "Oh, look, there's a tell. We should excavate it." And what you do is you go to the highest part, the central part that is likely to house palaces and temples, and you dig there. Because archaeology used to be funded primarily, mostly still is, funded primarily by museums who were looking for artifacts to display in their collections. And places most likely to have the most impressive artifacts are palaces and temples. So they were primarily where people dug. Some exceptions to that are the city of Ur. Leonard Woolley excavated some residential areas and found a whole load of interesting stuff. And there's quite a lot of work being done at the moment by people trying specifically to address this question and to look at how the non-elites lived. But there's not an awful lot of evidence or an awful lot of writing currently done about that.
Awesome.
I know there's more than what I can tell you, and I'll try and look into that later and maybe put together some texts that you can go and read that will more fully answer that question.
All right. Epic Christ, would you regard Michael Heiser as a good scholar? Yeah, I mean, Michael Heiser got his PhD under Michael Fox out at
Chicago?
no. Oh gosh. Oh, that's terrible. I'm blanking totally. Anyway, but he's a major in Semitics, so excellent Hebrew scholar. He's self-taught in Akkadian and Sumerian, which is not an easy thing to do. And so, I mean, and he would say, I think if you asked him, he would say that his work with Akkadian and Sumerian would be, it's not something that he's, I doubt that he would say that he's comfortable making bold assertions from the Akkadian and Sumerian. But yeah, I think he's an outstanding scholar in what he does. And there are obviously things that I disagree with. But that being said, I mean, I don't think there's anybody that I wouldn't disagree with. So no, I think Michael Heiser is a good guy. Do the ziggurats and pyramids have any connections, or were they built independently? Yeah, they were built independently. No connections that I know of.
Different building styles, even the materials used in the two places are completely different.
And the purpose.
Yes, exactly. The pyramids in Egypt are primarily mortuary complexes built from stone. The ziggurats in Mesopotamia are temples built from mud brick.
Mm-hmm. And I think the tombs house rockets. So.
Oh, that's true. That's true. Of course about
that. Deborah McMillan, the Anu symbol has 8 points and is a symbol of the heavenly god. And I heard that 4 points on a cross symbolize an earthly god. Old Japanese is very much akin to Sumerian cuneiform.
So by the symbol you're referring to, the heavenly symbol, that's the Dingir sign. It looks like an 8-pointed star. Yes, it can mean sky, heaven. It's also the name of the sky god An. It's also used to signify that the name that follows it is a divine name. I don't know of a 4-pointed sign the symbol that signifies Earth. What the key is like a diamond.
Yeah.
The sign for Earth key is its basic shape is like this.
Sorry, I think we may have come to the. She has another comment. Pictures of crosses appear on Anunnaki portraits. So wondering what you think. Thank you for trying to answer my question. No, the Anunnaki.
I'm going to have to look this up now.
Okay, the Anunnaki question. Actually, I'm interacting at length now with a group that believes that the Anunnaki are the Anunnaki have it's an amalgamation. The Anunnaki represents the Sumerian pantheon and represent biblical Christianity in one, that Enlil, the god Enlil, was Jesus, is now a guy named Raymond Elwood, who had the Spirit of God descend on him on January 28th, 2011. And his name is now no longer Raymond Elwood, but Rael, Lord Rael. He is Enlil reincarnated.
Also Jesus.
Right. He wouldn't be considered Jesus because Jesus is an earlier representation. There are other Sumerian gods from the pantheon there in their group, in their organization. So a guy named Richard Ruff, Cardinal Richard Ruff, is the reincarnation of the god Enki, and so on. Obviously, I disagree with their conclusions, but we're having actually a really good conversation back and forth. I've been interacting with a man called Angelus Domini, the angel of our Lord, and again, it's interesting to type out in the angel of our Lord, but nonetheless, it's been really good. They're nice people. Again, I disagree with them, but they hold to it seems like some form of Sitchin's Anunnaki teaching, and they believe that we're in the 7-year tribulation period right now. So it's something that I haven't seen before, tying together Sumerian pantheon, Sitchin teaching, and biblical Christianity, pre-trib biblical Christianity into one. Seems like it's pre-trib anyway. But yeah, I would, Deborah, I would, me personally, I would be dubious of conclusions concerning the Anunnaki for any number of reasons. But I'm trying to get someone on, either here on the Non Sequitur show, to talk to me in detail about the Anunnaki. And we had one person come on, the Godless Iowan. He really wasn't an Anunnaki person, so it didn't work out. He's a really nice guy, seemed like a very intelligent guy, but hopefully we'll be able to do something like that in the future. Dr. Josh, right, sorry. Epic Anunnaki is myth, definitely, though I do believe it came fallen angels. And this is, like, I agree, right, that, well, first of all, I think Anunnaki, the name in and of itself, is a misnomer, right? The Sumerian word for the Anuna gods, who are very common in Sumerian and in later Akkadian mythology, the Anuna gods, when you write them in Sumerian, you have Anuna, and then Kefor, which marks the ergative marker for those of you that have taken the Sumerian grammar class. So calling them the Anunnaki in and of itself is a bit of a misnomer.
There is no word Anunnaki in Sumerian.
That's right.
It doesn't exist.
That's right. That's not its lexical form. But what I would say about this, and this is just sort of I know I'm going to go off on a tangent here, but for pragmatic reasons, I did this Musings on the Move on our channel that talks about people that make declarative statements about topics that are debated, and really even topics that aren't debated, as like hotly debated. It takes a very long time and a very extensive formal training to be able to get to a place where you can say, I feel reasonably certain about X, right? So, for example, I have spent an awful lot of time reading Sumerian, and I wrote my dissertation on a subdialect of Sumerian, which is something called Unearthrographic Emissal. I'm one of a handful of people that have done it. And at this city of Kish, I've probably done it the most thoroughly. And even in that very specialized research that I've done, my conclusions, I would still call them tentative, because I don't know, the more that you learn, the more you realize you don't know. So, Epic, when I see you say, and I'm not trying to pick on you, man, I'm really sorry, but it's myth, definitely. Like, I agree with you that it's myth, but just, I would caution you, because your overall approach does seem to give off this idea that this is the way that it is. And I would just say that, like, hold off on that. you know, like, and that goes for all of us, right? I think we should all be very careful about things that we say that are definitively so, because it's very difficult to reach a level of expertise where you can say, yes, definitively, this is true. Because even when you get there, I still think you say, this is what I think. Here's all the evidence that supports it. It's possible that I could be wrong, but I don't think that I am. Anyway, enough about that. Clockwork X, don't say the guru. What are the Mesopotamian opinions on the Phoenicians?
I do not know.
Yeah, I don't know that I know that. I would imagine that Mesopotamia at that point would probably be more like, what are the Assyrian or the Babylonian opinions on the Phoenicians? I mean, yeah, certainly that would be more important getting into the latter second millennium and the first millennium. But yeah, I'm not sure that I have an answer off the top of my head with that. Okay. Well, I think we've gone a little over an hour and a half, and I think this has been good. Sorry, just to be clear, I wasn't trying to be a know-it-all about that. Quite the opposite. But I think there are things that we can know with reasonable certainty. But I just think particularly on these debated things, it's just wise to hold off on saying definitive things. Okay. Are there any final questions before we wrap up? This has been great, guys. This is a great first Ask Me Anything. I feel like we've done an outstanding job. Well, we've done a job.
We've been here.
Yeah, we've been here. Skeptical Christian, that is very excellent advice, Dr. Josh. Thank you. I have this tendency as much as anyone. When you learn something, you get excited and want to assert it as definitive. And that's most often a mistake. We all do it. Look, I mean, like, we all do it. And particularly in the face of people that we know haven't done this research, right? So, when you say, for example, I did this with this Hugh Ross, the meaning of Yom in Genesis 1, or some of these compatibilistic views in Genesis. I hear something and I'm like, I know Hebrew and I know what you're saying is wrong. But even with the thing, the thing about Yom, do I think that I'm right about Yom? Hell yes. Is it possible, though, that there's something that I don't know, that there's something that's going to come out later? Yes, absolutely. So I would say, yeah, I think I know what I'm talking about. But I would always say it's always possible that something else is going to come out. J.R. Pone, Josh, do you know Dr. Finkel personally? I love his videos and commentaries. We don't.
No, but he's awesome.
Yeah, we want to get him on. Actually, we've talked about this.
So badly want him on the show. He's amazing. Don't know him personally, but he's amazing.
I should read Josephus' commentary about Genesis 1. Okay.
We're done now. Okay. Thank you.
All right.
No more Bible, no more Genesis. If you want to talk to Josh about this, email us. Sorry, I've lost my patience.
No. It's okay. It's good. It's good. This shows passion, right? Passion is good. I really think that. Okay. All right. I'm like the great I don't go between. I don't know what that's called. Mediator. Anyway, no, this has been great. Well, guys, thank you so much, and
thank you for putting up with Oliver's noise.
Yeah, and
he is small but very vocal.
And if you haven't subscribed to our channel, please do that. It really helps us obviously get some notoriety. I don't know exactly how YouTube works with calculations and whatever, but and if you want to support a future scholar summer research project, please sign up for our Patreon. And I think we have as low as a $1 a month tier. Yeah. We have 20, 50. We have some really cool gifts, or I guess they're gifts, I don't know, rewards for the higher level Patreons. But you know, you get to be part of our council. Maybe if we do like $100 Patreon, we'll put the dinger sign before your name, you know, and you can be
You can be a god.
you can be a god anyway. So like and subscribe. But until next time, resist poor scholarship. Always ask, how do you know that? Thanks.